Good day, everyone. We are the Group 2, the Visionaries. I hope you're doing well. And today, we are going to discuss about a new topic, which is called crafting the new curriculum. So, as future teachers, understanding how to design a curriculum is not just important, it's helpful. It's also helpful because curriculum is more than just a topic to teach. It's a planned sequence of learning experiences aimed to guide your students towards a meaningful and measurable learning outcomes. So, as teachers, future teachers rather, we don't just deliver what's written. We also become curricularists. So this means that we take part in shaping what students learn, how they learn it, and why it matters. So designing a curriculum might not have received much emphasis in the past, but today teachers are expected to be an active role in curriculum planning. So I know it's a little bit challenging that because it demands creativity, strategy, and deep understanding as well. But as a future teachers, diba, we are expected to adjust based on our students' needs. So, inanadyo na siya. So, the first topic that I'm going to discuss is the 10 curriculum designing by Peter Oliva axioms. So, the first one is curriculum change is inevitable. So, it means that curriculum is not static. It must evolve as society progresses. So, it changes in culture, technology, values, and even even in education standards. So, as teachers, as future teachers, we must be open to innovation, and we must be responsive to the changes. So it's like we ignore making risks education irrelevant and outdated, diba, for our learners. So the second one is curriculum reflects time. So the content and structure of curriculum are influenced by the context in which it exists. That means that our curriculum should reflect recent realities. Like, we should be globally competitive. So we should learn new scientific discoveries. We should adapt to modern technologies and shift in philosophy, diba? Or even psychology, may nana. So the third one is old and new curriculum changes can coexist. So curriculum development is a gradual process. So new ideas don't always immediately replace old ones. So they often integrate with them over time. For example, traditional learning methods, so inanaman sa una. So I think it's already discarded entirely because we are in a contemporary world. So we should use, diba, technologies to, diba, para to innovate, mga nana. So we should it's okay to have a mix of approaches, but as long as they serve learners effectively. But I think technology is important karon na jud. So the fourth one is curriculum changes depends on people. So I think the success of any curriculum depends on the people who implement it. So it depends na sa jud sa teachers. That's why teachers are crucial aspects. They should not be just passive recipients of curriculum, but they should also be active designers and contributors. So when teachers feel a sense of ownership, I think they are likely more committed and more effective in delivering and in delivering the intended outcomes. So the fifth one is curriculum development is group effort. So I think it's a group effort because it's not a solo job. It benefits from collaboration among teachers. So not just teachers. So it's also beneficial, diba, to the administrators, to the experts, to the parents, and even students. So everyone brings a unique perspective to the table. So it can enrich, it can enrich the final output, diba? So it involves stakeholders, which also creates a sense of shared responsibility and support for the curriculum. So the sixth one is curriculum development is a decision making process. So designing a curriculum involves many choices. So it involves content, it involves the strategies. So how are you going to address the diverse learners? How are you going to assess, divide your students? So this decision must be thoughtful. So it must be guided by philosophy, the goals, and students' needs. So it's not one size fits all process. So the seventh one is curriculum development is an ongoing process. So a curriculum should never ever be seen as final. So as society and student needs change, and as teacher gain more insights, so the curriculum must be, I think it must be regularly reviewed and improved. So kailangan siya og mga reflection, feedback, or kailangan siya research, diba, to innovate. Mao na siya purpose. So the eighth is curriculum development should be comprehensive. So rather than treating your lesson in isolation, so a curriculum should provide a coherent learning experience. So each lesson, unit, or even subject area should connect to a larger educational goals. So it should consider time allocation, the materials needed, and the teacher's preparation, and also the teacher's readiness to design. So inana siya. So the ninth is curriculum development should follow a systematic process. And effective curriculum is not created randomly. So it's a well-structured process. It needs creativity. So because you are not going to just assess your students, you should follow the intended outcomes or the goals of the content, the methods, and the designs. So the 10th is start from where you are. So I think the best start to craft the curriculum is today. Dili kay sige ka ugma-ugma. And now let's talk about the ILO. So unsa may ILO? So ILO is the intended learning outcomes. So as future teachers, they help you and your students stay focused on purpose and progress. So it should be SMART. So na SMART. SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific means clear and focused in one goal, and measurable can be evaluated, ma-measure nimo. Attainable is realistic siya, given to the learners, and relevant siya, connected siya sa larger goals or real life skills or sa real life situations. So time bound, so achievable siya. And also, diba na we should also use action verbs from Bloom's taxonomy if mag-craft tag bingina. So like for example, mga identify, analyze, create to clarify the type of learning. So dapat ma-achieve nimo siya. For example, if maghimo kag lesson plan. So inana. That's all for my part, and I think I'll pass the next topic to the next reporter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am VA Cherilyn Aliado, and today I will be reporting about teaching and learning methods. Teaching and learning methods are activities that help students gain experiences. It is important to consider the strategies students will encounter, such as lectures, lab classes, and field work. This method should promote cooperation, competitions, and independent learning. For example, Cooperative learning involves students working together to solve problems, encouraging a democratic process where everyone contributes to learning success. Next is independent learning. Helps students take personal responsibility for their education, which is especially beneficial for fast learners, and for competitive allows students to test their skills against others in a healthy way, motivating them to perform at their best. Successful individuals often have a competitive spirit, which can start early in their schooling. Additionally, using various delivery modes, including online learning, is important, but this method should be planned carefully for effective learning experiences. Now we have assessment and evaluation. Assessment plays a key role in the learning process by providing students with feedback about what they have learned. There are three main forms of assessment: the self assessment, peer assessment, and teaching assessment. For self assessment, helps students evaluate their learning, while peer assessments allows them to give feedback to one another in a trusting environment. And for teacher assessment involves tests and feedback on students' performance. Assessment can be formative, which helps students learn more, or it can be summative, which judge students based on a set criteria. Many tasks include both elements. For example, an assignment might be marked and returned with comments. A summative assessment usually provide grades, but it's important that they also give feedback on strengths and weaknesses to enhance students' understanding. And now we have application of the fundamental components in other curriculum design. The components discussed can also apply to designing syllabus for a higher education or other curricular projects. These components include four major aspects of course design. First, intended outcomes or objectives. Define what students are expected to achieve after completing the course. Second, the content or subject matter outlines the topics to be covered, references used. Third, methods or strategies detail the teaching approaches and resources needed for the course. And the last is the evaluation, describes the means of assessments that will measure students' progress. Additional components may include templates or guidelines from educational agencies, which can aid in achieving specific educational goals. Each designer can choose to enhance their curriculum with these additional elements as necessary.
Hello, my name is Derek Bryan S. Salazar, and here I am talking about the approaches to curriculum design. When we say approaches, it basically means how we approach or how will we do it depending on the lens or the principle that we'll be talking about. So for example, we'll be talking about subject-centered design. So how will we approach if the subject is at the center, or if we'll talk about problem-centered design, how will we approach designing a curriculum with the problem beings at the center of the learning process? All right, so here we have on our slides, the first one is subject-centered design. This design puts the content as the main focus. As the name suggests, subject is at the center, subject-centered design. And by placing the subject at the center, the textbook becomes the primal resource of the learning environment. If you have subject-centered design, you have to have the reference, which is the textbook. Or in the case of the pandemic, we had e-books, electronic books. Moreover, school hours are divided into different subjects, which is widely practiced here in the Philippines. The student is the empty vessel receiving the knowledge from the teacher, who acts as the dispenser of the knowledge or skills. So think of it as pitcher, the students are the pit. Oh no, the students are the cups and the teachers are the pitchers. The pitcher pours the knowledge onto the cups like a glass of water. All right. It is also known as the traditional approach to teaching and learning, as it is the most familiar approach for teachers and students alike. So, if nakabantay mo dito sa Pilipinas, especially if you're an elementary or high school student, we could say 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. is science. 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. is Filipino. That is a telltale sign that the school or the educational system rather, is following the subject design under the subject center design. That's why it is tagged as the traditional approach, because it's been going on for so many years. Even my grandparents would have probably been under this approach. Moreover, it promotes conventionally compartmentalized learning. When we say conventionally compartmentalized, we mean by being the convention or the norm when it comes to studying or teaching. Because it's been the traditional. It's been a convention that each hour within the school day is a designated subject matter. Like the students would focus for 1 hour to one subject. That's why it's compartmentalized, because the students are being compartmentalized. For the first hour, they have to compartmentalize their brains into science, and for the next hour, they would be compartmentalized again into the other subject. As our former educator once told us, this design promotes students to being baliw. Sir Magno says na, kaya yung mga Pilipino, mga baliw, mga bobo. Kasi yung mga utak nila, science dito, math doon. There's no one thing that unites them. And in terms of unity, we'll have to talk about that later. For now, let's talk about the second in the subject-centered design, which is discipline design. Discipline design is not any stranger to the subject design, because it like moves up another level. For example, if this is subject design, discipline design is right here, because we are now talking about the discipline. So when we talk of discipline, it refers to a specific knowledge learned through a method which the scholars use to study a specific content of their fields. This approach focuses on the discipline. For example, if I am a college student majoring in history, then I would have to learn history by how the scholars used to learn history. Nagets ba? Akong Bisayon. If nag-major ko og history, mukat-on ko og history by giunsa pagkat-on sa mga nagkat-on og history sa una. Kung kinsay mga expert sa history, giunsa nila pagkat-on og history, that's how I will learn history. Basically that's the core of discipline design. In the same manner, teachers should teach how the scholars in the discipline will convey the particular knowledge. So it is not just about the students, it's also about the teachers. Because in this design, they have to teach the way those scholars, teachers, taught. So, for example, if I am majoring in philosophy, and I am learning about Plato's philosophy, then I would have, as a teacher, I would have to teach my students the way Socrates taught Plato. Okay? So, it's a way of replicating how the teachers of scholars taught those scholars back then. That is discipline design. And this is mostly used in the college or tertiary level of teaching, because secondary and elementary students wouldn't have to have the dire focus or extreme concentration to focus on a specific discipline. That's why in the tertiary level we have different courses, because that's where the disciplines come in. And then next we have correlation design. Now this is where, when I talked about the unity between subjects, come into place. Correlation design is the correlated curriculum that links separate subject in order to reduce fragmentation, all the while, emphasis on all the while, maintaining the identity of the subject matter. For example, the grade 8 students will be learning about science. Let's say scalar and vector units. So that would be speed and momentum. And in order to achieve speed and momentum, in order to learn speed and momentum, they would have to go with mathematics, in order to apply the learnings of mathematics to science. Basically, it's like relating two subjects into one. Relating science with mathematics to make it more holistic and not so compartmentalized, as I stated on the previous design. So in this way, the fragmentation of the student's mind is reduced. And the way Sir Magno taught us about this is that para hindi maging bobo yung mga estudyante, para hindi maging bobo yung mga Filipino, hindi math dito, math doon, nakafocus sila sa iisang tema. So for example, I wouldn't forget his example. He said water. So water, you can study water with science, like water, the volume of water is measured through a specific formula, and that's where mathematics would come in. And then water, going into English, we would need to have literature that had to do with water. For example, they would do an analysis of this movie called Moana and how water behaved in Moana, what is fiction and what is not with water under Moana. History. We could study about how water came to be on this planet, that's science, but it could also be social sciences or history, and how water had an impact in economics and global trade movement around the world, how water was a canal for trade, for example, the Mediterranean Sea, how trade routes came to be, how the Portuguese discovered Cape Town under South Africa, things like that. And the next is broad field, sometimes referred to as holistic curriculum, but also known as the interdisciplinary design. The design combines interrelated subjects like geography. We have geography, we also have economics, we also have Asian history, world history, and those subjects are interrelated because if you study history, you would then need to look at economics and geography. That's why the Department of Education has united these things as HECASI or Araling Panlipunan or social sciences. So that's how the broad field design manifested on the current educational system because of the unity between the different subjects or interests of social sciences. We also have MSEP or MAPE, music, arts, physical education, and health, all combined into one. Or in MSEP, musika, sining, at edukasyong pampisik. I forgot what MSEP means. But that is the basic idea of broad field design. Moving on to the next approach, which is the learner-centered design. As opposed to subject-centered design, this time the learner is at the very core of the learning process. Now, recognizing the overall importance of the consumer or the client. When we say client, it basically means the client, the students, because the students will be the client of teachers. On the first approach, we have child-centered design. In this, learning is a product of the child's interaction with the environment. Again, emphasis on the product of the child's interaction with the environment. In this case, the learner is not passive, but is active and has taken part in the lesson planning process. There needs to be an interest of the students, and these interests are then vitalized, and the students learn mainly by doing. If I would have to summarize this whole thing into one word, it would be constructivism by Pestalozzi, Froebel, those things. It's learning by doing and building on those things that the students have already learned and taking it to higher levels of knowledge and skills. That's the child-centered design. We adjust as teachers to the pace and the natural abilities of the child as they do the learning process. Next, experience-centered design. Experience-centered design believes that the interests and needs of learners cannot be pre-planned. There is no planning, there is no predisposition of how this class will turn out. Instead, experiences of the learners become the starting point, and then the school environment is left open and free. I think the most evident manifestation of the experience-centered design would be specialized schools, especially those with special abilities, SPED. They would have to adjust very, very greatly to those students. Or the Montessori schools by Maria Montessori, where there would be no homeworks, but there would be resources all around the classroom ready for the students to decide on which they would choose. For example, I've taught in a Montessori school. They have the resources all ready for them, and the students have the freedom to choose which resource to play with. And it's a very fun and free type of learning. So the students have a lot of freedom, as I said, and the stress levels of these students would be very lowered. Because Maria Montessori believed in the children's natural ability to learn. Next, we have the humanistic design, emphasis on the human. In humanistic curriculum design, the development of self is the ultimate objective of learning. The development of self, okay? It stresses the whole person and the integration of thinking, feeling, and doing. Where a person achieves this level is the accepting of self. Others in nature is simple and spontaneous and natural, open to different experiences, possessing empathy and sympathy towards the less fortunate, among many others. This anchors on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On the top of the hierarchy of needs, we have self-actualization. And Maslow says that if a person achieves self-actualization, this person would then be accepting with himself, others, and nature. This person would be simple, spontaneous, and natural, open to different experiences, possessing empathy and sympathy, and da-da-da. This person can achieve this state of self-actualization later in life, but this has to start while they're still in school. So in this humanistic design, teachers would have to strive in helping and aiding students in getting to know themselves and in getting to know who they are and what they can do and what they cannot do and how they will do the things that they cannot do. Because it is only in the level of self-actualization that these students would be humanistic and holistic. So we have principles here, principles of the subject-centered design, the principles of subject-centered design. The principles of subject-centered design. We have here the next slide. The primary focus is the subject matter, of course. I've established that. The emphasis is on bits and pieces of information which may be detached from life. The subject matter serves as a means of identifying problems of living. And then the fourth one, learning means accumulation of content or knowledge. And then the teacher's role is to dispense the content, just like what I've said earlier. Now that is all for the subject-centered design. But what about for the next slide, the problem-centered design? In this curriculum, content cuts across the subject boundaries and must be based on the needs, concerns, and abilities of the students. So instead of having the subject as the main focus of the curriculum, it is now the problem, because this strives to link the interest and abilities of the students with real-life situations and problems to cultivate lifelong problem solvers. Because ang problema puno og ang kinabuhi puno og problema, og way pulos ang usa ka tawo kung di siya kabaw mosulbad o musagubang sa iyahang kaugalingong mga problema. Mao nay gusto sa problem-centered design. Gusto nila magpadako og mga tao nga kabao, kamao sa gubang, kamao mo makigbisog sa kinabuhi sa tanang mga kaligut-gut, tanang mga problema, tanang mga pwedeng muharang nimo sa imong kinabuhi. On the first approach under problem-centered design, life situations design. It's very self-explanatory under title. It uses the past and the present experiences of learners as a means to analyze the basic areas of living. As a starting point, the pressing immediate problems of the society and the students' existing concerns are utilized. Basically, the main reference in teaching knowledge or skills to students would be the everyday problems that they face. That would be pragmatism in the pedagogical sense. Pragmatism, practicality, not being so strayed away from the culture of your students. Because in that way, the students would be able to relate to the teachers more, and that would make learning more relatable and more learning, basically. And then Herbert Spencer's curriculum writing dictates that education must sustain life, maintain the individual's social and political relations, and aid in rearing the children for the problems that they may face in the future. The second, under the problem-centered design, is the core problem design. Well, it centers on general education and that problems are based on the common human activities or the core of being alive. That's why it's called core problem design. It focuses on the everyday mundane things that the humans can do. And in the same manner, it goes back to the first one, which tries to cultivate learners to learn how to solve problems in the real world. Moving on, the central focus of the core design includes common needs like food, problems, and concerns of the learners. And in the book, it states 11 different steps in how to properly execute core problem design. Step 1 is to make a group consensus on important problems, so the students would have to identify within themselves what problems are they facing as a team in their lives. And moving from that, they develop a criteria for selection of an important problem. What makes a problem important, and what makes solving it important? Why does it matter for the students to solve this problem in the first place? Step 3, state and define the problem. Basically, if they know the problem, they have to strengthen the foundations of what they think is a problem and what that problem is. Step 4, decide on areas of study, including class grouping. Now, this is where the problem solving comes in. where they would attack in solving this problem. An example of this would be case studies, or yeah, case studies under science, political science. Step 5, list the needed information for resources, because you need to have the resources, the proper resources in solving problems. Obtain and organize information, analyze and interpret these information, state the tentative conclusions. So, they've obtained and organized the information, they've analyzed and interpreted the information. So, they would need to have temporary, or as the presentation says, tentative, temporary conclusions or temporary solutions. Then step 9, they would need to present a report to the class individually or by group, presenting their solution to the problem. And second to the last, we would need to evaluate the solutions or conclusions. And then we explore other avenues for further problem solving, because there's so many ways to kill a cat, and you can go one way, you can go the other way. So in step 12, it's exploring other venues or options in solving problems. So just like learner-centered and problem-centered approaches, we have principles here. So the learners are capable of directing and guiding themselves in resolving problems, thus developing every learner to be independent. What makes problem-centered design more effective is because the stakeholders or the teachers would have to recognize the students that they are capable of solving these problems in real life. The learners are prepared to assume their civic responsibilities through direct participation in different activities. The curriculum leads the learners in the recognition of concerns and problems and seeking solutions. Thus, the learners are problem solvers themselves, as I've stated. So in this approach, we are cultivating lifelong learners and problem solvers.
Hola everyone, my name is Alejandra Ando, and I will be balik. Okay na. Hola everyone, curriculum mapping is introduced by Heidi Hayes Jacobs in 2004. But we should put in mind that this approach is an ongoing process or work in progress. It also seeks to answer this question. Unsa may ganahan natong i-learn sa mga estudyante? Like, the next question is, what do they study in the first quarter, second quarter, and so on? And like what I've said earlier is the pacing of the lesson. Kani, what are they studying in the school throughout the year? Do my co-teachers who handle the same subject cover the same content? Achieves the same outcome? Do my co-teachers who handle the same subject cover the same content or different or similar? So, how do I help my student understand the connection between this subject and the other subject within the year? So let's talk about curriculum maps. So what is curriculum maps, DI? Curriculum maps are visual timelines that outlines the desired learning outcomes. Like basically, ang body rani is what you want to achieve. Unsa may ganahan nimo ma-learn sa student, what are the skills and values na imong ganahan nimo i-learn sa mga students. The instructional time, mga assessment na imong i-use, and the overall student movements towards the attainment of the intended outcomes. So next, I will be discussing to you about the pacing guide. So there are two guides, which are the horizontal alignment and the vertical alignment. Horizontal alignment will make all teachers teaching the same subject in a grade level, following the same timeline and accomplishing the same learning outcomes. Like, for example, we are focusing here by grade level. Like like the example of the book, like example sa book, kay, for grade 3 to grade 7, we will be discussing about matter. But it doesn't mean the same sila tanan. Like, example, grade 1, kay, we will be discussing solid liquid gas, but it's still matter. And for the grade 4, we will move forward to atoms, like that. So we will move forward to vertical alignment. That concept development, which may be in hierarchy or the spiral form, does not overlap, but building from a simple to more complicated lesson. Like, for example, we are talking about the quarters here. Like for sa grade 3, there are 4 quarters, 1 to 4. First quarter is we will be discussing about matter. Pero, dili na siya linear. Vertical alignment is mo build up siya. And for the next quarter, the second quarter, we will build up to living things and their environment. And so for the third quarter, we will be discussing the force, motion, energy. And for the last quarter, earth and space. Situate lang na vertical alignment builds up. Dili siya magstay sa one lesson. The more it progresses, the more it will be harder. So karon, let's talk about the process of the curriculum maps from basic ed and college. But first, mag-storya sa ta about sa basic ed. Number 1, make a matrix or a spreadsheet. Number 2, place a timeline that you need to cover, like 1 quarter or semester, 1 year. This should be dependent on timeline frame of a particular curriculum that was written. Number 3, enter the intended learning outcomes, skills needed to be taught or achieved at the end of the teaching. Number 4, enter in the same matrix the content areas, subject areas to be covered, or what are the subject areas to be covered. Number 5, align and name each resources available, such as textbook, workbook, module, next to subject areas. Enter teaching learning methods to be used to achieve the outcomes. Number 7, align and enter the assessment procedure and tools to the intended learning outcomes, content areas, and the resources. Number 8, circulate the map among all the involved personnel of their inputs. And lastly, revise and refine map based on suggestions and distribute all the concerns. Okay, next let's move forward to college level process. Number 1, of course, make a matrix or a spreadsheet. Number 2, identify the degree or program outcomes. Number 3, identify the subjects or courses under the degree. Number 4, list the subjects along the vertical cells of the matrix in a logical or chronological order. Number 5, list the degree program outcomes along the horizontal cell. Number 6, PO means the program outcomes. Number 7, cross the subject and outcome, and determine if such subject accomplishes the outcomes as either learned, performed, or given opportunity. Place the code in the corresponding cell. Number 7, all cells should be filled up. And lastly, number 8, after accomplishing the map, this will serve as a guide for all the teachers teaching the course for students to complete the degree in 4 years.
Here we have a curricular map for Bachelor of Elementary Education or PEED. Now, here on the left side, in the left column, we have the subjects: child development, facilitating human learning, social dimensions, teaching profession, principles of teaching, assessment and learning, educational technology, curriculum development, developmental reading, field study, practice teaching. All these things the student in the BEED program would have to study in 4 years. And then the stakeholders or the teachers would have to set their program outcomes depending on their institution. For example, in this case, PO1 just simply means Program Outcome 1, and Program Outcome 1 is apply basic and higher 21st century skills. So this would only be achieved if the student has applied 21st century skills, which is if they've established their learning or they have shown their learning through means of 21st century skills, like presenting it through Microsoft, PowerPoint, or animating, applying their learnings through animation, through infomercials, through infographics, and so on and so forth. And then program outcome 2 would be acquiring the deep understanding of the learning process. This can be manifested in how they answer oral recitations or essay questions during written exams. So these things, for example, in child development, the stakeholders would want the students of BEED to practice the learned outcomes, the knowledge and the skills and values. They would not need the opportunity to learn and practice it, but not taught formally. Do you get it? So, in that case, if ganahan ng mga teacher or stakeholders sa usa ka eskwelahan nga ang ilang mga estudyante kailangan makapractice sa learned outcomes pero di na kailangan i-practice, di na kailangan og opportunity i-practice basta as long as makita sa mga teacher nga they have practiced it, then they would put it as P for practice the learned outcomes according to the legend below. And for example, in the second program outcome, acquiring a deep understanding, the teachers would like to see if ang estudyante nila naaray learned outcomes pero dili na kinahanglan og opportunity mo practice it outside the classroom. So the teachers would only need to put L, and so on and so forth. So in this way, the curriculum is mapped in a very complex way nga makita sa mga mo implement ani nga curriculum on what they want to see from their students. If they want to see from their students nga learned lang ang outcomes or na-practice yun nila ang outcomes or naagid ba sila yung opportunity to practice these outcomes. So, but also in line with the different program outcomes. And that ends our report. Thank you very much.